Thank you. All right, welcome to our next Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee meeting. We're gonna have our focus mostly on the actions review, hearing from our task leads a little later. I think, yep, Marianne put the agenda in the chat, so if you want to reference it there. I'll start off going through some updates from the Vermont Climate Council, like I try to do, keep everybody plugged into the overall effort. And then a couple of report outs, finalizing who is going to oversee the different tasks. We had a couple that were kind of up in the air still, so we'll finalize that. I'll give a quick report out on the crossover of our Pathway 3, overall Pathway 16, and the crossover for cross-sector mitigation, how we're going to approach that. The task group report out, and I'm doing this off memory, so if I miss something, let me know. And then we have some folks also from the Climate Action Office who are gonna help or go through the SharePoint, talk about how we can use that, and talk about any issues, or we can have a general discussion also of what else might get posted there. And Sophie is also going to join. That's not on the agenda, but Sophie from the Climate Action Office is going to join later to talk about some outreach efforts later in October. And so we will have an opportunity to look at that email that went out earlier this week and ask some questions about that. And I think that was everything that we had planned. So we'll jump in. We have to review our minutes from our last meeting. So if folks need a little bit of time to review that, we also were not able to review the meeting minutes from June or approve them because we didn't have enough people, I think, in July is how it worked. So just put linked those meeting minutes also in the chat, in the agenda. So if we need a couple minutes, looks like Anne's trying to log in and having some trouble. We need a couple minutes to review those. Should I give a couple minutes, or are folks already done that? Let's just take a couple minutes. Okay. If you click on the link for the agenda, they're linked in there, so that's where they're at. So has everybody had the chance to go through them? Anybody have any comments or edits that need to be made on either the August 20th or the June 14th minutes?
I could probably provide some clarification on comments I was making about concerns I had around multiple things. And I would probably want to just clarify that it's not so much that I have concerns about municipalities doing multiple things. They do multiple things all the time. More I do far too many things all the time. It was I can edit those comments to just make it clear that my concern is about developing actions and strategies in silos. And the example that I used was looking at building codes and having the building codes be an area that cross-sector mitigation would be looking at, and just the, I guess, lack of Oh, sorry. It's been a really long week of meetings. I can provide some clarifying language. It has more to do with not addressing both resilience and emissions reductions, the full climate package, if you're going to be looking at building codes, and instead looking at building codes in silos, looking at building codes just in terms of emissions reductions, and then looking at building codes in terms of resilience, when in fact that should probably be done together. So my concern was just if we are talking about actions to reduce emissions, actions to improve resilience, but at the municipal level or at any implementation level, we really should be thinking about actions that encourage folks to think about both, wondering where that ends up happening. So I'll stop talking and I will add some comment. I will edit those comments to make that a little bit more clear.
Okay, thank you. And was that was in the last meeting or August 20th?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sorry.
Can we consider the June 14th approved? All right, so we'll consider those approved. And then get those edits from you, Bronwyn, for the August 20th. You can get those to Sue and you can copy me and we'll go from there on those. We'll look to approve those next time.
Excuse me, just one second. Was there a motion made? I didn't hear anybody.
I don't know if we have to be so formal as to have a motion in a second, or just does anybody not want to approve him? Everybody approve him.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sue. All right, great, thank you. And then I just wanted to provide a couple of updates. Our membership list continues to change a little bit. I'm going to share my screen because I have a bunch of the documents open. If I can, here it is. Are you seeing the list?
Membership list? Yeah, looks good.
Yeah, okay. So Anna, who was one of our just transitions liaisons, has had to step down. And then I just wanted to bring up the list because it has been modified as of earlier this week. And so it should be accurate now. We've gone through some changes, so I think it's updated and accurate. And just wanted to let folks know that we now have, I guess it's not even 14 members, but okay, that's all on that. I don't think there's been any other subcommittee changes, so we should be good there. And then just to kind of ground us in the conversation again, going back to that, excuse me, the guidance document that was shared a few weeks ago at the steering committee meeting, and where we are at. So we're on step 2 here, reviewing the existing strategies. And like I said, we'll hear a report out from the different task groups. And then towards the end of the meeting, we'll talk about where we're going with this step 3 and moving forward with a deeper assessment and gap analysis and modifications to address those gaps. I wanted to share a document or just mention that this was discussed at the steering committee meeting on Monday. Basically just the framework for the next iteration of the climate action plan and how it is different or similar to the last one. And basically a lot of the same were mentioned here, of course, for the pathways that we're considering. And then just mention that there is going to be a couple of new chapters, one climate stories, and then the prioritized actions that we've been talking a lot about, really focusing on what is really going to get us the biggest benefit and bringing those to the top. And I think this climate stories will be a great addition and really impactful for the document. So I was glad to see that incorporated too. Let's see. Yeah. They also talked about this visual aid incorporating just transitions principles, a little different than the narrative and the checklist, but basically just translating that guiding principles guidance into this visual representation. So we'll get into this later when we apply this into the recommendations that we make, and maybe I'll talk with you, Danielle, a little bit more, or somebody else from Just Transitions, just helping us work through that maybe, or even providing sort of an example of how we would apply this to the recommendations that we make, maybe at our next meeting or the one after that even. So just a lot of good work done here to really just break it down in a different way so that folks can visualize it differently and work to apply these just transitions to what we do here. What is the next one? Oh, cross-cutting pathways. This was also shared. There was a memo and I believe an email from Liz earlier this week also on these cross-cutting pathways. And basically what this memo does is proposed that the original pathways that were cross-cutting be broken down or narrowed down to focus on workforce development, education, and compact settlement, which I believe were in the original ones also, but just to leave it at that. And that was based on the fact that the environmental justice pathway that was in there was sort of considered complete because of the environmental justice law. And then also there was a pathway about state government, community, and partner capacity. And that is considered complete with the establishment of the Climate Action Office. And then also in this memo, what they're proposing, what the memo proposes is that the Climate Action Office with representation from each subcommittee will lead the review of those 3 remaining cross-cutting pathways. They'll hold 2 meetings to be able to do that. They'll be open to the public. And so that's just sort of what that memo is and where things are going with those cross-cutting pathways. And I'll follow up and reach out to the subcommittee in a separate correspondence to see who might be interested in doing that and how we want to coordinate or, provide representation to that effort. So I'll follow up on that, but I did just want to mention it. And then there was
Wait,
also,
Andrea, sorry,
yeah.
Can I ask something really quick?
Yeah.
And I followed up with Liz, but haven't heard back yet. So that in this memo, it says that building codes and transportation pathways are moved to cross-sector mitigation. But the
Yeah.
Rural Resilience Subcommittee had an action around building codes, and this gets to what Bronwyn was just clarifying a minute ago.
Yeah.
I know there's some
Yeah.
interest from the subcommittee, and we had talked about it last time and wanting to coordinate with cross-sector and building codes. So I'm curious if that came up at the steering committee meeting at all, or if you've had any conversations with cross-sector about that. And then just logistically, like what happens to that action?
Yeah, I don't recall that coming up at the steering committee. I don't know if anybody else was there that remembers that, but it did. I don't know if building codes specifically, and we can talk about this a little bit more when we talk about the other pathway for consideration that we're coordinating with cross-sector on. But in the meeting yesterday for cross-sector mitigation, it did come up that outside of, well, both buildings and thermal, their task group, and the energy task group, that we really need to be kind of going back and forth with our actions. So I think just with the people that are in both of those subcommittees and just trying to coordinate on those is what's most important, and reminding them that there is a resilience component to that and not just sort of energy or mitigation related. So yeah, I guess it's just going to take making sure that we're aware of that concern or that interest of ours, and whoever is our representative on that is keeping more than just these workforce development, education, and compact settlement at the forefront, and making sure that we coordinate on those other things that sort of got swept off the cross-cutting pathways. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Yeah, just really quickly, so I think this is an example of where it's an action and the state has a mitigation plan. and how we're going to make sure that we're tracking some of those actions to make sure that they continue to speak to each other between the two plans. And so how we're going to continue to be part of that conversation if it's kind of being pulled away from the subcommittees that VEM is on. I'm not sure how that'll happen.
Okay, I think, you know, if we can talk more with the Climate Action Office folks too, that are coming later, because Liz sent out this memo, so I know, obviously she's in the know about what the vision is and how that will work, but she might have some suggestions on how to do that. And I think, you know, maybe we could collaborate a little bit amongst our own subcommittee to sort of put those thoughts out there in a more formal way to say, we need to make sure we don't have this lost, and sort of identify those specific areas for that. So let's keep that in mind as an option, but we can talk to them when they're here later in the agenda too. And then stop sharing because I don't think I have any more documents. There was also an email, I think I sent it out to you all again yesterday, but I think you all received it earlier in the week as well. It was a little unclear who got the email about the engagement and stakeholder and the ask for identifying when we want to do our stakeholder outreach and who we want to do that with. But Sophie is going to be here later in the agenda and she can talk to that a little bit more, kind of provide an overview of the email and answer any questions that we might have on that. So that's sort of the connection to the bigger picture. Any further questions on that? All right, then we will jump into our next topic, which is the final actions lead. And Marion provided a PowerPoint and overview of some of the work that she and Otis worked on last time. And we said we would give that some thought and finalize who was going to take the lead on those sort of the crossover ones. So Marion, if you want to take it away for that, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, so Andrea asked that we kind of use the spreadsheet Otis and I worked on for our last subcommittee meeting. I'll walk through what we did for this again, just to refamiliarize folks with it. So folks recall the 3 task groups under the subcommittee sort of went through all of the actions and that fell sort of within the Rural Resilience Subcommittee from the 2021 CAP and sort of identified who they thought, which task group they thought would be a lead. In some cases, there is overlap, 2 task groups identified wanting to be a lead because the sort of subject matter area expertise needed to update a particular action or strategy kind of cuts across the focus of our task groups, which is okay. I think that's kind of how it goes with a lot of these resilience actions, and there's going to need to be a lot of crossover. So I think we'll get to it later, but it sounds like task groups have sort of been working on the actions that are clearly assigned to a particular task group, but we need to just clarify for any actions where there were multiple task groups identified as a lead, clarify how to sort of move forward in coordination on those actions. And we'll just say, I think reflecting back to the conversation just now about cross-cutting pathways, this doesn't include any actions that sort of fell within the cross-cutting pathways area. So, you know, for compact settlement, it sounds like that will sort of be handled through a different avenue, where there will be kind of a set place for coordination. The same goes with workforce, but then building codes, I think there's still a question mark. So we'll just note that that action isn't in here, and we'll kind of have to think further about how to coordinate on that. But my thought was to kind of, again, work through this spreadsheet and just focus on the actions that were highlighted in red, as that meant there was more than one task group identified as a lead here, and see if either task group members have had discussions about whether or not it makes sense for, or they're interested in taking the lead. I think it would be great to hear from you all about what you all think is sort of the best approach to coordinate. So if we use this action, technical assistance for flood and erosion risks facing drinking and wastewater systems, use that as an example. Both the community capacity and planning and the infrastructure task group noted they were kind of interested or thought that that action fell within their purview. There's a couple of approaches I see. One, we could sort of have a lead task group who then, works to revise the action or change it as they see fit, and then they consult with sort of the other task group that had expressed interest. Or if there's a lot of crossover, perhaps, folks from those two task groups sort of meet to discuss that action or a group of actions together. So we might need different approaches for different actions, or perhaps just one approach works for all of them. But I thought it would make, in order to kind of clarify who's moving forward with editing actions, working through where there's crossover, and then seeing where folks think the best approach could be for coordination across task groups. Does that sound okay, Andrea?
Yeah.
Different thoughts.
Could I ask a question? Just,
Sure.
Marion, where do we find this spreadsheet?
Yep, this is saved. I can pull up, sorry. I'll put the link in the chat. This is the spreadsheet that we used at our last meeting. So if you go to the calendar on the website and find our meeting from a few weeks ago, it's linked in the documents there, but I can, give me just a second, I can put a link in the chat.
Thank you.
These are the type of things I think we could use our SharePoint for, and we can talk about that a little bit later too, what might go on there, especially if people can get access to it.
If they can access it, right. Yeah, this is an example of, this is a document we'll continue to use. So if we can have a SharePoint access point for folks, that might make it easier than having to go back in and
I have a question on this one too, if I could. I couldn't find the raise my hand command.
That's okay.
Sorry about that. On just this one as an example, the first one, provide technical assistance. If everyone agrees with this, that it's something we should do, what more is there for any team to do?
It's a good question. So I think there's sort of some key questions to think about, whether one, checking back and seeing if there were kind of progress notes provided through the CAP action sort of progress spreadsheet that the Climate Office pulled together a few months ago, where they checked in with partners about progress made on this particular action. So I think one, just checking into that progress spreadsheet and seeing if there's been movement on this action and whether updates need to be made on this. And then two, if nothing needs to be made on it, I think then it could just be agreed upon to keep it as is and move forward. But that's something that has to sort of be noted and discussed between folks. Or one task group takes the lead, kind of decides this is good as is and we want to keep it as is, and just confer with the other task group and then move on to the next one. So not too much, it doesn't have to be too much activity, but I think there are some actions that may need further revisions than others.
Yeah, I think it's just making that upfront split to decide, is it going to stay? Is it going to go? Does it need modification? Just like we've been working on over the last couple of weeks in our task groups. And then if it does need modification, who needs to be consulted, like that entity reaching out and making the language. But
well, and I think, like, for your example, Mike, I mean, this might be an easy one where both task groups just say, yeah, this needs to continue to happen, and we leave it as is. I think what we want to avoid is two task groups taking the same action, revising them into different directions, and then having to later figure out whether those are two new actions or we need to combine them. So I think just figuring out how we want to approach coordination on these actions, even if it's just sort of an easy, like, let's keep it as is and move on.
My very basic call on this is, I think community, pathway 14 is largely in community. So just keep it in community, and, as they develop, they can keep us in the know. And then, when you do your report outs, or if this is something that changes or there's something different about it, then just let us know, the other task group know. So that would be my call. If you're focusing on most of these strategies and actions under this pathway, then take this one too.
Well, so I'll check in with Scott as the lead for community capacity task group. Scott, how does that sound to you?
No, I mean, that sounds fine to me. Sounds like a good recommendation.
Okay. We'll do that. And Andrea, I like that thought process of, if there's sort of a clear lead for one strategy and actions where there are both multiple task groups assigned, maybe going with the lead for that strategy. Okay, so moving right along, again, I'm just going to the ones that were highlighted red. The next one falls under pathway 2, strategy B, which talks about public, private, and nonprofit entities being prepared to respond and recover. And this action is about integrating planning and preparedness across disciplines and geographies. Andrea, you had a note in some other spreadsheet about it being okay for community capacity to take the lead. Otis, I don't know if Otis is on, we talked about this yesterday. I do think this is a case where infrastructure is actually, well, no, just kidding. This is actually the only action under this particular strategy.
I know it's the only, it's kind of a standalone, but, and also I can't remember, Mike, if this is one that we talked about in our group. That was just my voice. I certainly wasn't necessarily speaking for the other task group. So just my input. So I don't know.
Yeah, I
And
think this was just one we talked about that hopefully it's happening already, like B-Trans working with communications and power companies and things like that. But it's definitely something that would be good to make sure that's happening. I can tell you that we do work with B-Trans and we try to bring in communication, for an example, but it's just something that needs to happen.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Ann.
Thanks. Just, I gave this feedback, I think, at some point on a spreadsheet, but this did originate from the folks who did the infrastructure strategies and actions in the last climate action plan. So I would really like to keep the nexus with infrastructure here. And I don't know if that means, you know, being very deliberate about our coordination with the community task group, but I that just want to give some background for where it originated. Thanks.
Yeah. I think that looks like a good tool.
Well, I was gonna say, and yesterday, Otis, we were chatting about this and Otis wasn't sure what this action meant. So happy to keep it with infrastructure and kind of coordinate when we come back together as a full subcommittee to review action. So that sounds great. All right. Moving right along, the next action is a lengthy one, but this is really around identifying mission critical facilities in collaboration with various stakeholders to identify investments needed to mitigate the impacts of extreme storms on services provided by critical facilities. Andrea, again, you previously had a note about having infrastructure take the lead because there's several other actions under this strategy 15D that the infrastructure task group will follow up on. Curious to hear folks' thoughts on this. We had some notes in our community capacity and planning group around just ensuring that VEM is involved in these conversations as well. And Eric, I don't know if you want to weigh in, if there's been any work to identify mission critical or critical facilities at all. I'm recalling previous projects from Homeland Security Unit, but I'm not sure how far along those are. So just want to ensure that if infrastructure takes the lead, that there might be some coordination with VEM folks as well.
Yeah, and we've done quite a bit of work before Matt Pritchard left with CISA developing, I guess, overlapping maps on what critical infrastructure is. So we might be able to put some of the effort towards this.
Okay. And are there folks from VEM on the infrastructure task group? I can't recall.
Stephanie is, right?
Oh, Stephanie is. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
I think you're good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
no,
So
you're
then we'll keep this one in infrastructure and then we can share our notes with you just through conversation about where there might be some follow-up with partners who've done work in this space.
right. Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Trying to remember if the new MBI tool identified any of these facilities too.
We did. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, we did get it sort of cursory based on like information from local emergency management plans and just did it using E911 points. So again, if there's been further work to kind of dig into that in more detail, I think that could be combined with this, with MBI. And again, other work that Eric was speaking to. Okay, moving right along here. So the next handful are all related to pathway 3, which Andrea, I know you're going to talk in more detail about kind of the coordination with cross sector on that. So I think we'll just wait on these ones and save that for the conversation that I think is coming up next. Okay, so a lot of different colors there, but we'll move past those. We have a few here under pathway 4, which is focused on land use. There's an action around regionalization efforts and sharing of resources for water utilities. Again, Andrea, you had a note around having infrastructure take this, as the other actions under this strategy also fall to infrastructure, but curious if folks feel differently and or are more familiar with sort of regionalization efforts around water utilities and if those have progressed. Okay. Not seeing anyone jumping up.
The only thing I would say here, and I think we talked about it in our other meetings, is just, I think a lot of the things in here are covered in a lot of the other actions too. So it is a bit duplicative, that's all.
Yeah. Which I think if you're following sort of some of that guidance around like how to go about deciding if an action needs to be revised and then what revisions make sense, some of that speaks to kind of checking back with the strategy and ensuring that the actions that fall within that strategy are needed and are not duplicative. And so, you know, that's sort of making a case to keep this particular action with the task group that's looking at that full strategy so that you all can sort of do a bigger picture look at the actions that fall under there to ensure that they're kind of meeting the goal of the strategy in the pathway.
I know Andrea just stepped away, but that is what we've been working on.
Right.
Yep.
So that's great. There's a couple actions I know under here, and you know, Anne and others who kind of helped write these last time know this as well, that sort of relate to water and wastewater utilities. There aren't folks from DEC Water and Wastewater who are on this subcommittee, but they were sort of pulled into the process for the 2021 cap to help draft some actions later on. And they were also sort of checked in with when we did the action progress report, which is on the the other spreadsheets we all have been working in. There's sort of a tab that has all of those progress updates. So I think folks know this, but in the infrastructure group, just ensure that you're sort of checking in with folks from the water and wastewater groups at DEC, because those progress reports come from them. All right. We have a handful here still under pathway 4 for land use. One that focuses on investment to municipalities for expanded water and wastewater facilities to support reductions in inflow and infiltration. Let's see, so that this is again also related to water and wastewater. And Andrea, you also had a note here around keeping this with infrastructure as it kind of falls within that same strategy. And I think given we decided to do that for this regionalization action, I would vote we do the same for this one as well. Does that sound okay? Okay.
Good to me.
All right, so moving on to the next strategy under pathway 4, so still focused on land use. This action is around establishing a dedicated comprehensive state program for funding hazard-prone properties, easements to conserve river corridors, floodplains, forests, and wetlands. Both the infrastructure and community capacity and planning task groups noted interest in taking the lead on this. I'm just looking.
Stephanie and I were talking about this. I think it makes more sense for infrastructure to take it because Stephanie's on that group and that's really her program.
Okay. Would that make sense to apply to the next one as well, which is around criteria and increased funding for VHCB's conservation and buyout program?
I feel that she's coordinating more closely with them. So it probably also makes sense to go that way.
Okay.
Yeah,
that
I think
one is less certain, but
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I do feel like infrastructure has quite a bit, but I'm starting to feel a little bit like, whoa, that's a lot. But anyway.
Yeah. No, there's quite a bit related to infrastructure and encourage, I think, what Mike said around thinking about consolidating actions too. That makes it a little easier to talk about them in groups.
Yeah.
I will say that under this particular strategy, there is one action around ERAF that I think was clearly assigned to the community capacity and planning group. But there's components of ERAF that are related to infrastructure standards and things like that. So I don't know if we need to revisit this, but just flagging that there's there's an action under this strategy that will go to a different task group.
I
Unless we
think that
want to.
makes sense for that to be with our group and community.
Okay. All right. Moving on to pathway 5. Quite a few bits of crossover here and kind of pulling in the public health task group too. So the first action is related, and so pathway 5 is around safe, accessible, energy efficient, and affordable housing. The first strategy is around state and local land use governance, regulations, and practices. And then the first action here is around increasing manufactured housing tax credits to replace older and inefficient manufactured homes. So this was sort of identified as potentially both a topic of conversation for the public health task group, as well as the infrastructure task group. I don't know if folks have started talking about these actions already, or think there might be a clear lead for this one.
Oh, I see what you're saying is deficiencies in manufactured homes.
Yeah, this action is around sort of increasing the tax credit program to replace older and inefficient manufactured homes, which again, you know, kind of the quality of our housing can impact kind of public health outcomes or health outcomes. So I think there was some thought around the public health group being maybe not a lead, maybe just consulted in this, but
I think it's more consultative because infrastructure, the integrity of the building is probably what's going to drive this. But the public health issues with things like if you've got a leaky roof or a leaky seam or something that was not built to spec or incorrectly, that can cause mold, mildew type of things. So the integrity of the building, the quality of the building is going to create the public health issues, I think. So I think public health would be more consultative here in terms of what the issues are with deficient buildings.
I don't really see how it's infrastructure though. I feel like
You know,
everything you just said, Alice, was very public health.
I kind of feel like we need to just back up and look at 18A and see what this whole thing is getting at, but
Yeah.
well, and the other thing I was going to ask is, you know, this whole pathway is around access to housing, or sort of, more energy efficient, better cited land use policies and access to housing. And I don't know, you know, we've talked about this in the past, Andrea, and I'm asking you because Val's not here, but if the infrastructure task group has sort of talked about what falls within the umbrella of infrastructure and whether or not housing falls there, because if not, I think this whole, you know, pathway, some might fall to public health, some might fall to infrastructure, some might fall to community capacity, but kind of that question around housing as infrastructure, as a key community service.
and we haven't
will make this a little bit
about
more.
that. We didn't even review it in our groups actually. So, and that's because I didn't include it on our spreadsheet, our working spreadsheet within our group, because I think, one, I was feeling like infrastructure had enough to do already. And two, those similar thoughts, and just, you know, clearly from the nature of the scatter of who should take the lead on it. I would be fine. I mean, we listed the pathway and the strategy in our working spreadsheet just to be aware that that is happening and what those are as we continue our stuff and figuring out, like, is anything that we're looking at in other actions and strategies, you know, overlapping with that. But I don't want to speak for the whole task group, but I would be fine with someone else taking the lead on these. Either group, I don't know where that lands.
Read them. Community comes to mind even more than public health.
I would agree with that. Some of this stuff relates again to the capacity at municipal, town, and village level to basically advocate for and implement programs. So, for example, a lot of this is going to be related somewhat to weatherization and electrification programs. So it's building the capacity, it's building the institutional structures to basically implement some of these things. So I would say some of these go under community.
Okay, which we do have for some of them, right? This one around expanding the program to relocate mobile homes,
I
pilot
wouldn't-
program for local builders.
The ones that jump out of me are the tax credits. I think that could be community. The
Well,
other one is expand the pilot program for training. We talked about that recently, about not necessarily building affordable housing, but looking at also climate smart housing. And also the retrofitting or the replacement of homes. That we're jumping into the next topic here, but I did have a conversation with David Farnsworth from cross-sector mitigation, and they're also dealing with some of the stuff within their group.
Yeah.
So it's building the support systems for this stuff that can be happening with thermal, for example.
Can we maybe just put community there, know that there is crossover with both of the other task groups, and especially public health and with cross-sector, because, well, for one thing, I feel like we just need to make a decision and call it. And I like the idea of making sure that we don't break up, like nobody gets too down in the weeds of the actions without looking at the strategy, because some of these strategies might need to be revised. And if you're looking at a strategy and one person's looking at that action and the other person's looking at that action, then you can't really have that conversation very productively. So and because we're getting a little bit behind on the agenda, so kind of just need to move on.
Okay, so just to repeat that back, Andrea, you are proposing that the community capacity and planning task group take all of pathway 5.
Yep.
Okay. And that we consult in some way with the other task groups. I think that's sort of the question I have is, how do we consult? And if there's going to be space in subcommittee meetings to kind of have those back and forth conversations, or if that we as a task group need to kind of figure out how to do that on our own. Speaking as a member of the community capacity and planning task group.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I think we need to be doing that as a subcommittee, but I also think maybe task leads are going to have to do that to some degree as well, and bring it back. I think there's going to be, there's obviously, even beyond the task groups, there's breakouts from there, people working on these different items. So it could be, one person from community, one person from health that have a 1-hour meeting to say, where should this go? And then bring it back to the subcommittee. And most of our remaining subcommittee meetings are going to be, largely at least half the meeting talking about the substance of these actions and the language and getting into the details a lot more. So the report outs are going to be a bit longer for sure. They just need to be.
All right, well, that gets us to the end. So I'll clean the spreadsheet up and post it with today's meeting, and then we'll also just send it out after with sort of the updated assignments. But yeah, I appreciate folks walking through that.
Awesome, thanks, Marianne. Yeah, and so the next item is that crossover with cross-sector mitigation. And I have a very brief slide that is pretty basic. But basically, we talked about this from the beginning, that pathway 3, which says reduction of fossil fuel in rural areas, that there's an obvious, on the surface, on the face of it, an obvious crossover with cross-sector mitigation. And so I went and talked to them. I talked to the co-chairs first, and then went and talked to them at their subcommittee meeting yesterday and presented this slide. And there is definitely a different viewpoint to take with this, but there is obviously also a lot of crossover. And right there in that box in the bottom left-hand corner is the reason that it's included in the rural resilience recommendations, because it was a specific charge from the Global Warming Solutions Act to this subcommittee to consider. But yeah, there's clearly a lot of crossover, and that just needs to be coordinated. And so we did get a volunteer from the Buildings and Thermal Task Group in the cross-sector mitigation, Dave Farnsworth, and also Scott volunteered to sort of take the lead on that coordination and on the pathway in general. So they just met this morning for the first time, so we can take a few minutes just to hear, Scott, from you how that went, and sort of maybe if you came to any conclusion of a way to coordinate, or initial first thoughts on the whole thing. I don't know what level you got to with Dave today, but so that's it. I think we were all in agreement that this deserves some coordination with that subcommittee, and so here we are jumping into that.
Okay, I can summarize. We had a very brief 30-minute conversation. David is actually the lead for the thermal task group under cross-sector mitigation. They also have a transportation task group, and they have one other, which I can't remember right now.
Energy.
Energy, thank you. So they have 3 task groups. We basically talked a little bit about the progress they've made. The thermal group has already put together recommendations for revisions to strategies under pathways, not down to the action level yet, quite yet. And what I talked about was maybe the best use for our time is to support their work. So they're taking it from sort of a regulatory and policy perspective, and also a technical perspective. And what we can do is we can bring in the resilience, community capacity, planning, relevant infrastructure and public health into what they're doing. So we would be supporting their efforts as opposed to them supporting our efforts, since they seem to already have some clear ideas on where they want to go. It was a very good conversation. David wants me to sit in on their subcommittee meetings, so that we can continue to talk about this as we move forward. I'm
On
happy
the
to
task group, Scott, or the subcommittee, or both?
subcommittee.
Okay.
I think that's what he was mentioning. I don't think it was just a task group, because it's just the thermal task group. I think, I can't say what the other 2 groups are doing, but for the thermal one, there's a lot of crossover. It's stuff, some stuff not so much, but other stuff related to weatherization, electrification, standards, codes, etc. And this is where I think we might be able to resurrect some of the code discussion. They're talking about energy codes and electrical standards or electrification standards. But I think there's other ways to integrate some of the other codes we've been talking about, like building codes, for example. Also, any relationship whatsoever to land development codes at the local level.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we agreed that the best way to handle this is for us to support them with actions that are more relevant to resilience and adaptations, as opposed to us taking the lead on what they're doing.
Any comments or questions or other considerations? I know there's other people who feel strongly about this. One of them was Allie, and she's no longer with us. So I don't know if there's anybody who can channel her thoughts, but obviously, Bronwyn, you had some thoughts, and I know, Candace, you have some expertise in this world. So whether or not that means helping Scott with that coordination, or being, somebody else to bounce things off of, or how that can work, but just wanted to open it up for further discussion.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, now that we've moved all the building level assets over to community planning, I actually might ask to switch task groups. That's where I usually lie. So I would love to help you, Scott, in any way possible. My big stress, I think, will be, or not stress, but my big focus would be not creating separate resilience programs or separate resilience codes. I think any effort we do should be merging with the outreach and the programs that are already there. So our weatherization efforts should be including resilience benefits. But yeah, would love to help with that.
I would love your help. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, and Candace, you may be one of those people that got put in this task group as your second choice. I think there was a lot of first choice community people, so.
Got it.
But I think if you know, if you feel like that's where your expertise lies and you can have more value there and interest and engagement, then we can have a bigger group and smaller groups. It's fine.
Or happy to help with both if you still need infrastructure help. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's great too, if you can do that. I know it's getting to be a lot of meetings. Thanks, Carolyn.
Yeah, I'm not sure like how much there is the crossover, but if that is the action, because that is in the original climate action plan, word for word from the 2018 plan, and it is in the 2023 plan as well. If that is indeed what we're talking about, just making sure that we're having that conversation all together. We have Norwich actually identified as the lead on that action, and we're going to be talking to them about a brick application, and if that can move forward or not. So there's always space for changing it and updating it and thinking about who should be working on it. But again, just want to make sure that we're part of the conversation.
I'm kind of cut out there for some reason, but we get your gist. So yeah, that's great. All right, so that's happening, and we'll get updates as it progresses, and we continue to meet. So thank you, everyone, for that. So now we're into let's see, where are we? Task group report outs. All right. Yeah. So I was going to share some slides on that too. Oh, do I have them open? Hold on a second. My mouse is being very finicky today. Okay, is that okay? Can people see that well enough, even though the other slides are over there? Okay. So, yeah, I think Scott, you're up first for the report outs. Just if you can, in, you know, 5 to 10 minutes tops. It'd be great to each one of us have about that time frame to report out, and then be able to have some whole group discussion on where we're at and where we're going to go.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So again, the group is myself, Marion, Bronwyn, Dahlia, Carolyn, and Otis. We've had, I think, 2 meetings since the last subcommittee meeting. Pathways and strategies, I tried to outline everything there, and basically we just went through it with Marion's update of the spreadsheet. So I'm not going to bother to go through that. What I will say is that we spent a significant amount of time updating all of our notes from previous meetings into a spreadsheet so that we could look and see what our previous discussions were. And I think, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, everybody else on the task group, as I finish, but we did spend a significant amount of time on pathway 1, looking at tools, capacity, policies, etc. And we did some revisions of strategies 14A and 14B, and also started to discuss some of the other strategies under that. The last meeting, we decided, in between the meetings, we decided that the discussions by group, by task group, would take a significant amount of time to come up with revisions and replacements. So we agreed to allocate the various strategies and actions to individuals within the task group. So we've done that, and we now have a process of going forward and having the individuals look at each one of these assigned responsibilities. For the other pathways, as I mentioned, we've identified task group members, and we hope to have a good report back at the next task group meeting, which we haven't scheduled quite yet. Resources to reference, documents, legislations, that's mostly TBD. I think as the individuals start working on each one of the strategies and actions, we'll get a better sense of what documentation or interviews we want to do. And we have talked a little bit about some of the key interviews, and I think it's relevant to put this in the context of the memo you shared from Liz, Andrea, about stakeholder engagement. Because when I read that, it brought up a lot of issues and questions I have about how we're going to move forward on interviews. But we did mention several, for example, regional planning commissions, selective state legislative representatives. But we also talked a lot about discussion with municipalities, towns, villages, cities, et cetera, to try to get a better sense of how these impact upon them and what their needs are. So in terms of engagement, my questions are basically as we move forward. I think in the memo, and I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, but in the memo we said, it says that each drafting subcommittee, that means the Regional Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee, will have 2 stakeholder focus groups facilitated by CBI. I guess one of the questions I have as we go into further ideas of who we want to talk to is whether or not we can do our own focus groups outside of CBI or our own interviews without getting into conflict with the Open Meeting Act. So I think that's a very quick summary. Please, other members of the task group, if you have other contributions, please add to what I had to say.
I wanted to flag that I haven't read it in a ton of detail, but I did catch something about how there is a plan for separate stakeholder meetings specifically targeted towards municipalities. And it just caught my eye because I knew that one of the stakeholder groups that we had talked about was municipalities as well. So just again, wanting to coordinate like how those stakeholder meetings go. Are we tapping into the same municipalities, but having sort of different conversations in those stakeholder meetings? You know, one being focused on rural resilience actions and the others being focused more broadly. I didn't know if that caught anybody else's eye, but knowing that we were planning for stakeholder meetings, but then the Climate Council is also looking to do a separate stakeholder meeting group just for municipalities. I just figured that would be worth a little bit more discussion and coordination.
Yeah, Bronwyn, I had the same concern, basically because we as a task group or even a subcommittee, we might have different questions. So the idea is how do we coordinate with that? My understanding is that is a grant to the RPCs to hold those meetings. Isn't that correct, Marion?
It will be, yes. Yes.
But I have the same concern is, you know, are they going to focus on things we think we need to be addressing? And how do we integrate our concerns into the RPC's discussions?
It looks like we've lost Andrea. So I am not sure how to proceed.
Oh.
Yeah, does anyone else have the slide deck that they could pull up? I don't know that I
No.
could go looking for it, but I don't think I do. And not that sort
Yeah,
of
I think
I have it in a file if I can figure out how to share it. Unless she's come back.
I don't see her.
it doesn't look. I don't know. I think she said something about having an electrician around.
solar,
today,
yeah,
so,
solar
yeah.
panel.
Yeah, so might have had to.
So does she have to, how do we get rid of her sharing?
You can just, you should be able to just share over her. If you have it up, Scott, you press share screen. You should just be able to take over.
All right. Okay, well, I've got it up, but I don't know how to actually get it in.
Hi, I'm back. Is it the matter that I left you with
Oh, there you
Yes.
are.
a screen that's not relevant to what you need to talk about now? Sorry, solar's back up and working. We're producing energy from sun. Yay. So yeah, this is us. Are you all still seeing the slides? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for the interruption there. So yeah, Val's not here, so she asked that I do the report out. These are sort of the pathways. We're all on the same page about those now at this point from the last agenda item that we went through. So we have met 3 times now, I think. We're kind of on a feeling like we need to be on a weekly cadence to keep up some momentum on this and make some ground and really start digging in before maybe we split up some more intense work. But we did that. We went through and sort of did do we want to keep it? Do we want to remove it? Do we want to modify it, combine it? We definitely saw some themes with a lot of actions around water, wastewater. That stuck out to me as a theme, and some notes indicated the same for others. Yeah, so Val says there, we've identified a few actions that we want to remove or combine. So we're really trying to approach this with a focus of narrowing down and being really clear and specific. As we were going through them, we definitely had a lot of question of like, what does this mean? You know, how are we going to know if we're doing anything with this? And so I put in the chat a little earlier some of the questions to ask as we were going through these, and I think it's a good idea to revisit those as we start to decide what effort we're going to put into any revisions or combinations. So anyway, that's sort of where we are. We'll start digging into the revisions next, and we really didn't focus our conversations yet on the resources. You know, documentation or otherwise. So we maybe can have that conversation with the broad group today, especially when Sophie comes later to talk about the outreach, or she's already here, but when she talks about the outreach. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. We can catch up some time here because we're a little behind, but does anybody else, Mike or Candace, have anything more to add to that? So we're plugging away. Felt like they were productive meetings, the last couple of meetings we had. And I think our next step is to sort of indicate what those themes are and add another column in our spreadsheet to say, to kind of start lumping. And I think we recognize that we'll be able to lump some, but then also when we went through the actions, we kind of were like, no, that's 2 different actions, probably 2 different implementers. So we'll be doing some splitting probably too. So that's where we stand. And I will put this one up for Alice to go through.
Okay, this is the report out of the public health task group. One thing we don't have yet is pathway numbers. So I figured what I'd do after this is work with Andrea and Marion to help define that. What pathway numbers, I mean, I think we could come up with any number, but making sure that we're assigning them correctly, or, you know, we could have pathway 104 at this point, but with kind of a holding pattern on those. But what we've had 3 meetings. One was just one with myself and Jared. We had a meeting on Wednesday, and where we're at is the first thing we did was try to identify what it is public health needs to do to communicate. So communication became our overall theme. Like if we looked at the resources that we have in terms of all the information we need to get out to the public and get out to the municipalities it's there. The website has incredibly good information. It has good information for our public health officers. We were just looking at strategy ways to get it out there. Using our regional health offices more to help us do that, and also our RPCs. We're definitely looking at keeping the website up to date, and have some downloadable information for anyone in the municipalities that they can use. We are the Department of Health, Public Health, had done a study in 2017, and it discussed all the hazards and all the areas that we'd be concerned about with climate change coming up. And in that report, which I did put into the spreadsheet, it really nails everything that we're looking at in terms of the effect of climate health, the effect of climate change on health. And there's 4 areas that really came forward that we're immediately concerned about right now. And that's heating and cooling, meaning staying warm in the winter, and cooling, very concerned about the issues of heat and heat-related illnesses based on the weather pattern we've had this summer, where I can say my town and many municipalities may have been caught with not enough cooling centers for people in their community. We're worried about smoke and air quality from different areas, especially with the wildfires, where the smoke either is above us in the Ontario region or coming across from the west and causing particles in the air and heat alerts. Other things like pollen, ozone, they're there and they've always been there. And we're worried about water quality right now because of all the flooding. We not only have all the viruses that get stirred up during flooding activity, but you also have fast-moving water, which is dangerous for people to go in. And unfortunately, we had an example of that here in Warren, and at the Warren Falls, which is a national forest site, national park site, where an individual died by jumping into very fast-moving water and getting carried away into the rocks. We're worried about infectious diseases. We're right in the middle of the big EEE outbreak right now. And Dr. Levine pointed out that this is kind of the 100-year mosquito invasion, that our EEE problem is exacerbated by the numbers of mosquitoes that are out there because of all the rain and water that we've had this summer. And the big one we're also worried about is in disasters being able to provide mental health services for individuals that are going through the disaster, coming back to their disaster, and ongoing PTSD from this. People that are worried about is it going to happen again? And in many cases it has. So we're looking at different methods to get that communication out there. We came up with one that we talked about, which was, how do we deliver the message? You know, our messages are all about viruses and smoke and all the terrible things that are going to happen. And how do we deliver that message to folks in the most humane way we can, rather, say, here we are again, the Department of Doom and Gloom. And we found 2 things that have worked. One is through the municipalities, when people come, and have these disasters, that the municipalities are leaders in helping people get the information they need that's help for them, where their funding sources are, letting them know that their town governments care, that there are resources for them to talk to and find out about, what kind of funding options they have through FEMA, through the state, et cetera. And the other one is, and they just did this in Burlington, Dr. Levine cited this, that they wanted to get the message out about EEE and why they are canceling night events that were going to be very popular, like the Beer Fest, et cetera. And the Burlington took the lead on getting that information out so that it was coming from a community type messaging rather than hi, we're the Department of Health and this is what we see. This is what you have to do. We're shutting down your beer fest and your music festivals and stuff. This rather became a way to communicate to folks that this is really community driven. We need to care about each other. And that seemed to be a really good approach for us to do that. One other thing that we talked about was some frustration with making sure that our messaging is getting to municipalities and being seized by those municipalities to get the information out there. Because when somebody's going to call and ask for help or ask for information like say in the town of Moortown, where are they going to call first? Well, they're going to call their town offices. Say, what do we do? Hey, I'm hearing about this EEE thing. Where do I get a COVID shot, et cetera? They're going to start at their town offices. So we want to make sure that the town offices have the information, the towns have the information they need, and then use it. There's been some frustration about towns and municipalities taking emergency management and public health information seriously enough. Like, we have a town health officer, we're all set. So we're finding that we think that the biggest challenge right now is making sure that we're getting the information to municipalities and impressing upon them the need to spread this information for us so that it's coming from a local community level. And we feel we should be working with the regional offices, local organizations, Vermont Emergency Management, and also the State Hazard Mitigation Program. For example, when we did the new local hazard mitigation plan for Waitsfield, we added a number of health issues in there as hazards and ranked them high, especially things like heat and extreme rain events, and discuss the kind of public health hazards that need to be mitigated. So that's where we're at. There's a lot of information for us to kind of first take a look at ourselves, where are we at, and now that we have a good idea about everything, how do we get the information out there the most effectively? Now I got some other things we can talk about from the spreadsheet we looked at that we can add in terms of how can we contribute to things like deficient housing structures, modular, so there's a little more I think we can do, but was our big start.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else from the Public Health Task Group have anything more to add to that? Thumbs up from Dr. Levine. Okay, so let's just take some time now. If there's any questions, I'll stop sharing, somehow. For, any of the task groups or, just the progression of the work. Yeah, open it up for any observations or questions that might have. Go ahead, Alice.
Yeah, I just forgot I wanted to mention just because it's up there. There's a report that came out today that the governor is citing. Vermont Public, Peter Hirschfeld, has a big article about new report reignites debate over Vermont's energy future. And it's a study looking at, and it's really critique of the heat plan, the Clean Heat Act that
Mhm.
has been passed. But the costs that it is going to burden the ones who can least afford it type thing. And I just wanted to say that it's out there. The governor's kind of jumping on this as I guess it's kind of I told you so type approach. But I will also say, be aware of it because it's a very hot topic on the Mad River Valley Front Porch Forum.
A onesie twosie that kind of defines.
Yeah. Hey, Ben,
I just wanted to mention that.
go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thanks. I've been hearing about that as well. I was curious, Alice and others in the public health, if you've gotten so far as to think about with what you're discussing, is that shaping up to be just like one more pathway or more with different strategies, or it seems largely around communication and different aspects of communication, but just curious if you think that's maybe you haven't gotten that far yet.
Right now, I think it's mostly around communication. But I think the task group needs to talk a little bit more about what we were saying, partnering with other organizations like, Vermont Emergency Management, the RPCs, et cetera, a little more about using the regional offices and how we can motivate the municipalities to use them more. So right now, yes, communication was the big one. That's where everything gravitated to. But I'm thinking there are one or two other pathways there that we should be involved in.
Thanks, Ben.
Hello. So let me start by apologizing. I missed a key public health working group meeting, and I've been multitasking, and I'm a little fuzzy on how everything nests together. And I see Andrea and others struggling heroically to try to keep all the different layers of things in alignment as we move forward and try to talk about real policy changes. My observation, having said all of that from sort of the bleachers, is that the things that are falling in the gap a little bit seem to fall into a housing bucket. And I've lost track of whether there's a housing bucket that somebody else owns, or maybe housing just needs to be its own bucket, because these are things that are about housing. They go to a specific legislative committee, and housing is what is falling in the gap.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight, and something that we can all be thinking about in our different task groups, is I think infrastructure and buildings or in the built environment has that. Even in the pathways that we're looking at, there are strategies and actions around housing too, to some degree, and maybe more generally. So I think, yeah, we just all need to kind of keep that on our radar. But we did just talk about also pathway sorry if I get the numbers confusing, but I call it pathway 18. And the crossover with cross-sector mitigation and what Scott is working on, and others with cross-sector mitigation and how that might come to bear in a final recommendations, but also that having a big crossover with public health. And so,
Yeah, if we're writing a new plan, I mean, the way my brain works is that housing is the bucket.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on with housing. There's a lot of things that spin off of housing, and we're talking about compact settlement being the a cross-cutting pathway also, and that housing is in that bucket too.
Well, there's also, Ben, I agree with you. There's also a discussion to be had about where we build and where we develop. And there's always, what I'm seeing, especially here right now, in a planning project, is a bumping of heads on not encroaching upon areas that we need to preserve because they are important to mitigate flooding and to help climate change and clean air, versus we need housing, we need housing, we need housing. And, you know, there's also areas that look like it'd be great places to build, but they're not because of disaster flooding issues. We have another one here in Waitsfield that we, just this past rain event, there's 2 buyouts out of 7 houses, applications. So I think you're right. I think we need to be paying attention to where we build and how we build so that we don't create ourselves more problems, more disaster type problems, more landslide type issues like they have in Barry. So I'm not sure where else I want to go with that, but you know, we could be we need to understand, I think, and towns and municipalities need to understand the need for mitigation versus overbuilding or a rush to building.
Yeah. Alice, that's true. And if I can go on just with the discussion, I think everybody struggles with the unwieldiness of the climate action plan. And we all struggle for kind of a hook to glom on and understand what is it actually inspiring us to do, you know, something that, what's the big idea that the legislature can pass that the governor will sign that will bend the curve. And if we start with a problem statement, the problem statement is we're 30 to 40,000 housing units behind. And that's driving lots of other problems. And if we attack it as how are we going to solve that problem in a way that reduces transportation impact and improves the energy efficiency of our housing stock, reduces the flood vulnerability of our housing stock. I mean, you know, if you lead with the problem you're trying to solve and enumerate all the co-benefits, that is sort of an action-oriented approach to planning. And that would feel more satisfying to me than what we're doing.
So Ben, if I could jump in here, I think pathway 18, as Andrea's labeled it, or pathway 5, right now it speaks about affordable housing. I think that's could be your bucket, and whether or not you integrate that across the whole climate action plan is another question. But that bucket to me, no, let me finish. That bucket to me is, when I look at it, it's not well worded. It's not addressing the issues that we need to address. I find some of the actions in there sort of not really interesting, or they're redundant with other activities, or they're not politically even viable at this point. A rental registry is not politically viable right now. But if we were to take that pathway 18 and deal with some of these things you're talking about, there's transit-oriented development studies which relate to LDCs. There's weatherization electrification programs for old housing. There's low-income housing and landlord sponsorship for weatherization programs. These are the things I think could go into that pathway. And I think it would make it much more significant, and it would address some of these issues. And also it deals with codes, energy codes, building codes, land development codes, and support the municipalities to actually get things done. And where are you going to find resources? LPC, RPCs, legislature, whatever. But I think that one needs to be rethought completely.
Yeah.
We need to get good numbers. I mean, my issue right now is I've heard the number of houses needed. That number is kind of all over the map. I mean, I'm looking at people saying 71 here in this area of Waitsfield, where the Regional Planning Commission, when we looking at the region, is saying 25 in this area. Now, one thing we might want to do is connect in with the regional planning commissions, because right now they are charged with looking at the needs regionally, each region in the state, in terms of housing, development, land use, etc.
We got like 1 more minute for this. We're behind our. I think it's a great conversation. We could talk about it for the next hour and a half to 4 days. And we have to move on, but I think it's great to bring it up and keep that in mind as we move forward. And that's what we were trying to get at with these report outs too, to come up with the themes that we're seeing so that we can tackle those things in a different way than maybe they were first organized, without, we're not doing a completely new climate action plan here. We only have so much capacity within our own workloads. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. We're supposed to have public comment. I don't know that there is anybody here from the public, but I'll open it up for public comment now. Okay, and then we're a little bit behind, so I want to thank the Climate Action Office for being here, Liz and Sophie, and let them take it away with the topics. A couple of topics that we discussed earlier was the cross-cutting pathways and engagement, but first Liz was going to just touch base with us all on the SharePoint site. So go ahead, Liz. Thank you again for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to check in with folks and see if anyone was having any issues accessing the templates on the SharePoint site. I'm happy to help troubleshoot that right now.
Which template are you talking about?
So the task group templates.
Can you just start off, Liz, with showing people what that is and sort of how to navigate to them? Because I feel like we need to start off at the very basic. We have a lot of different spreadsheets going around right now, and that's one of the things that this SharePoint is supposed to do, is to bring us to a central place to share information and access documents. So hopefully people are trying to get there. I've heard a lot of problems from people outside of state government being able to access it, but I'm not sure people even are really understanding what it is.
Okay, so yeah, to start off, and I'm happy to resend the link after following this meeting. But the SharePoint link will bring you to the site, and you would click on the Rural Resilience Subcommittee folder right here. And this, in here, a lot of different kind of documents live. You'll have be able to access agendas, minutes from these meetings, but also you have a template folder, and this is where those task group templates live. So you'll click that, and this is where you'll find the 3 different task groups. And so let's say you're in public health, you'll click on that, and then this is the point where when you click on this template, it will prompt you to sign in to your account to be able to access the template itself. So it's just the important piece here for doing that is to sign in with your partner email. If you sign in not with your partner email, you won't be able to get in. But the trick is sign in with your partner email, and then you'll be able to access the templates. And then this just allows a real shareable, editable document for task groups to work off of. So you're not needing to save the document, send it off to someone, it's all saving it in real time. Just an easier way to kind of carry the workflow forward. Any questions on that? Okay.
No, the problem I have,
this-
I couldn't access it.
when you couldn't access it, what could you not access? Was it the template? Was it getting in the SharePoint site itself?
Getting in the SharePoint site. So if I was told I was going outside the system and then it asked me to sign in and it wouldn't let me get in.
Wouldn't let you get in. And from this to access, so you couldn't get to the screen.
I could, from my partner account, I couldn't get in.
Okay, so if we do have any tips on that?
I think anybody who's having a tough time, maybe Liz, if you could take note of who's having issues, if there's anybody from Scott, and then you could follow up one-on-one.
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard this from many people that they can't access it all from their partner account or their other one, or
Yeah, instead of when I click on the template, instead of prompting me to log in, it just says you don't have access, you don't have permission to access this item. And I can request access, but it doesn't let me log in. And if I try to sign in before hitting that paywall, it's not recognizing my password. So I might have to reset the password, I guess.
But
Yeah,
if
and
you
one thing
request
I think-
access, does it go? Sorry, Sophie.
Sorry, I think Liz, did you send out the troubleshooting document?
Yeah, I did.
Great, okay. So if folks have gone through all those steps and they haven't worked, then Liz, I think you need to follow up with people one-on-one.
Okay, yeah, so please do reach out to me if you are having trouble getting in here, and we'll work on that. Thanks. Okay, anything else on task group templates? Okay. And then would it be helpful to talk about the cross-cutting pathways memo as well, Andrea?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I had also sent out an email to folks just with kind of information and next steps on cross-cutting pathways. So there will be
Yeah, sorry, Liz. I did give an overview of sort of what the memo was and how we're going to break up.
Great.
A little bit, but
okay,
yeah.
Are there any questions?
Sorry, Liz.
It's okay.
Did I get distracted on trying to provide resources for the SharePoint?
Okay, then if no questions, I'll hand off to those for the next part here.
Great.
What is the timeline for that? Just providing sort of the representation, and is it one or two people from each subcommittee?
So we're asking, it could be the same. So we're asking for at least one representative from each subcommittee on each of the three groups. So if you have one person who wants to do multiple, that's fine. If you have like two people who want to do one, two want to do it, like that's okay. And then we're asking that you let me know who those people are by September 20th.
Yeah, and there was some earlier questions. I forget who asked them, but about Marion, maybe you brought it up about the building codes and how some of that was just put to cross-sector mitigation. And I mean, basically we just said we have to kind of be aware that that happened and it isn't going to be discussed sort of in this way, and that we just are concerned. There's some concern of that just being shifted to another subcommittee without it being cross-cutting, because I guess we still feel it is cross-cutting.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm gonna touch base with Marion and Jane about that. Yeah, I'm not sure the best next step there, but I would think that there would be some like consultation, whether it lives in cross-cutting, in cross-sector or rural resilience, that members could like consult with the groups working on it, so that there is still like, you know, if there's expertise and collaboration, that could still happen. But I'm going to touch base on what exactly that step is going forward.
Okay, so the three areas are the workforce development, education, and compact settlement.
Education, compact, and workforce. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess you know, if you guys have a particular interest in one of those pathways, cross-cutting pathways, just email me and let me know which, or if it's more than one, let me know that too. That works for everybody.
Liz, could you, or Sophie, describe what you mean by education?
So there are, there's just a variety of pathways and actions that fall under that, that section of education. So it can mean a lot of different things, and that's all accessible in the resource page as well. So if you want to look at specifically like what actions are there, like you're able to do that. So once we have you working in that resources that site, you'll be able to see what exactly fall under that.
But in addition to public education, would it include stakeholder engagement and outreach?
A good segue.
Yeah. So maybe that's there's going to be subcommittees will be engaging in that work, and Sophie's going to talk about that shortly.
All right.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is to go back to the original climate action plan and look at those cross-cutting pathways and look at the actions and stuff that were underneath those for more specificity, and then reach out to me with your interest. So thank you. And then, well, Sophie, if you want to talk about the engagement, that would be great. Would she go? Is she here? Yeah. Sophie? Okay.
Could I ask a quick question while we're waiting?
Sure.
So those groups, the compact settlement, education, and workforce development under cross-cutting pathways, what's our inclusive term of like what they're called? Like a subcommittee, or I just want to make sure I got all my right task force and subcommittee language right.
We're calling them kind of cross-cutting pathway groups right now.
Groups, okay.
Yeah.
Right. And do we want staff support on those too, or is that just the official members?
I guess the staff in this count as a subcommittee member? No.
We have
okay, then
yeah.
Okay, then it seems to be I mean, yeah. I think it's just subcommittee, but I could follow up to clarify. Yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Sophie.
Okay. Sorry if you called on me and I missed that. My dog just started chasing cars, so I had to go grab her.
Okay.
Andrea, did you I know you said you would do up the stakeholder meetings, just I don't want to repeat anything you said.
Yeah, no, I didn't really get into it. So I just mentioned that there was some correspondence earlier in the week, and I think we followed up. I can't remember what emails have gone out to. So if you could start from the beginning, that would be great.
There's a lot of emails, and just want to thank everybody for doing your best to keep track of everything. I know it's a lot going back and forth, and everybody's been working hard on their subcommittees and task groups to make the work happen. So I'll provide a broad overview of what we're thinking. And is it the case that everybody did receive that email from Liz about the community engagement stuff or the stakeholder meetings?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So the big picture is that each subcommittee gets 2 stakeholder groups in October, focus groups. So it is up to you to decide how you want to use that time, both in terms of what you want those to focus on, so kind of 2 focus areas, 1 for each focus group, and then who you want to be at the table and for us to invite. They will be open to the public, so you may have people more broadly than your specific invitations that go out. And in addition, so because it's 2 focus groups per drafting subcommittee, that equals 6 total, and that's mostly what I'll be working with you on. I wanted to flag for your awareness that there will also be 2 separate municipal stakeholder groups. That planning for those will come later, and those will be more cross-cutting, though they can touch on many issues, and we'll be designing, working on those in collaboration with RPCs, regional plan commissions. And so what the main asks at this stage, oh, and just when I say October, it's actually like the last 2 weeks in October and the first week in November are options. So we have really like a solid month before we actually have the meetings. But now's a good time to start working on designing those meetings and making sure we know who we want to be at the table and get those invitations out. So my ask that went out is for the subcommittee to decide the broad 2 buckets, the categories that you want each stakeholder meeting to be about, and to work with me, which the co-chair can do, to schedule 2 dates for those. So those items should take place by next Friday. Hopefully those pretty small asks. And then Liz and I will create similarly a spreadsheet, a template, maybe template's a strong word, but just a repository for you to put in ideas for like specifically who you want to be there and who should be invited. And that we would love to have like a solid list by Friday the 27th. Doesn't have to end there, but if we can start getting out a really good list of invitations after the 27th, that would be great. And you can add to this list like really specific entities, such as like a nonprofit organization or this particular town clerk, for example. Or you can also list kind of more broad categories of people, such as, we want some town clerks to be there, or we want representation from food banks, for example. And we can help you to kind of fill in those, get representation from those entities or categories that you have identified. Let me just double check to make sure I didn't miss anything. In the broader picture, Climate Action Office is going to help you we will like get the invitations out. If you want to send some of those invitations because you have a personal relationship, that's great. Like we can work on that together. But my goal is to make this like as easy for you as possible. And so we will do a lot of that work of getting the word out and making sure that people show up. We will also provide to you kind of a plug and play template, and so that you can just pop things into that slide deck. There's always a balance between providing enough information that people are informed and can contribute to the discussion versus making sure that we really are taking the bulk of the time to hear from people. So that will be like a balance to strike. There was some discussion at Cross Sector about that yesterday, and the idea of like maybe there's some material sent out in advance to certain stakeholders. So something for discussion. And then we'll also collaborate with you to help kind of like design that discussion and the flow. And these will be facilitated, I think I forgot to say this, these will be facilitated by Consensus Building Institute. So you will have a professional facilitator with your group who guides the conversation. I'll pause for questions, comments, concerns.
I have a question. You mentioned decide what the topics would be, 2 categories of what the meetings will be about, and then also who should attend. But geographically, what are we talking about? Like anywhere in the state, or is this strictly video or
Video, sorry, that's an important point. They'll be virtual,
okay.
So any state and getting broad representation geographically is possible and important. And just I should also flag in the spring there will be in-person engagement meetings, and those will be distributed around the state in person. We want to do these virtually because they are like sector and topic specific. So if you've got agriculture, for instance, you want to make sure you're kind of hitting across the state. Whereas the difference between this and like the spring meetings, all of the spring meetings will have the same content of going out with the draft plan. So it's kind of okay to do that like place by place, if that makes sense. But yes, these will be virtual. So no limit on like geographic invitations.
Question in terms of CBI doing the facilitation.
Yeah.
So let's say, for example, that we select a group and we have specific questions or guidance on questions we want to have done. So that would be done with CBI, or we do it through you, Sophie, or how would we make sure that sort of the framework that we're looking for is actually implemented under the focus groups?
Yeah, you'll be working with me and CBI. And I'll be working like directly with David Plum, who probably many of you know and are familiar with. He may or may not be your facilitator because they have many facilitators. So part of his role will be like making sure he gets staff for each of them. But we'll work together to, the questions that you want to frame up, make sure there's a really clear. I don't know exactly what, like in terms of who's asking the question, it might be something we want to queue up where the facilitator is passing that off to subcommittee members to be the one to like ask the question. I think that's a great approach because then it's really direct between you and the people you're talking to. But I don't have that like level of detail planned out. But again, that's what the collaboration is for, and we'll work through that together and come up with a design that you all are happy with.
Okay, my other question is, we have 3 task groups and we're allowed two focus groups. Does that mean one task group gets left out?
I don't know the answer to that.
I'm asking our chair.
Yeah, I don't feel like the focus has to be per task group at all. I think the focus can be, I don't know. I guess I'm not 100% clear on how pointed we have to be in these, or if they are just opportunities to hear about what rural resilience is doing, what direction we're going in, and what we're missing and need to be thinking about.
So
at 2 different times.
So how would you see this working, Andrea? Do you want just suggestions from individuals, or do you want task groups to meet and propose something, or how would you like to move forward?
I feel like I need to give this a little bit more thought of the best way to collaborate on this, and I kind of wish we had another meeting before, because if I'm right, is it like next Friday you want to know our meeting dates? Is that right, Sophie? And then the following Friday, more of the content feedback?
The following, yes, next Friday, just dates and like broad topic area. So, and what you said, Andrea, is also a totally acceptable approach. If you're like, we kind of want to cover all the bases in both meetings, that's totally okay too. So that's what's due by next Friday. And then the following Friday, the 27th, is just brainstorming people you want at the table, people/entities. So just getting a list together. Again, it doesn't have to be final, but if we can get a pretty robust list together by Friday, that'll set me up well to make sure we've got invitations out to the right people and get good showing.
Okay. I guess one question I have for you, Sophie, is if a bunch of us provide input, us meaning different subcommittees on the same people, how are you thinking about tackling that? Instead of like, I think Rich brought it up a little bit yesterday too, like if we all want to hear from the same, say we all say RPCs.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha. Right. Rich was talking about not like overburdening one person, and we want to make sure that person isn't asked like, hey, could you show up to all 6 stakeholder groups? So I'll be able to look at all the different things that people are sending me, and I will do some of that, not triaging, but if I notice that of like, oh, this person is being asked, I would bring that to the co-chair's attention, and we would figure out how do we want to handle that. If it's a broad group like RPCs, then I think what we would do is like invite a certain RPC to one, invite another RPC to 2, split it up in that way.
Yeah. Okay. Kind of wish we had more time to talk about this so that we could kind of come up with
Exactly.
different themes and then determine who those themes relate to and invite them. But I feel like there's not much time to do that.
I was gonna say, Andrea, we might have to schedule another meeting between now and next Friday, huh? Or
A
do you just
subcommittee
wanna?
meeting feels hard to do that in the next week, but yeah, and same thing, like I wish our SharePoint worked so we could just work off of that, but it's starting to get a little unruly about where documents are being shared from and how that's working. But that's where we're at. So I'll just give it some thought and figure out if people can meet next week, great, but I know it's a lot. And you're probably having some task group meetings too.
And I apologize if it's tight. I know it's a tight time frame, and I wish we could have gotten this information out earlier. A thought on process, maybe Andrea, people could email you with their ideas, and you could kind of compile them and see if there's unless there's like wild disagreement, maybe that would be enough, and then you can communicate that on.
I will probably send out a shared document for people to access because I don't think there's an issue with people accessing my shared document. So I'll try to do that because I can't deal with 20 emails and trying to put those together, to be honest. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
So I will try to do a shared document and provide some guidance on themes. Okay, you have to go, Sophie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Yeah, and Liz, I think we're all set too. We kind of need to wrap up our meeting here anyway, but thanks for coming, and hopefully we can figure out that SharePoint issue because I think it'll be really valuable to be able to work off the same space. So yeah, I'll send something around and try to get some clarity and organization on both of those things, the outreach and the cross-cutting pathways. So everybody can provide input on that in one place. When can we meet again? If we can meet next week, great. If we can't, I get it. And I would be maybe suggesting that we meet again in a couple weeks though. So maybe we could tackle the second half of the outreach in that meeting. So just looking at calendars, it seems like Wednesdays and Fridays have been, although it's Thursday today, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but when can we meet without sending out a doodle poll and trying to have to do it that route because it just is hard. I would be looking, I think, again at the week of the 22nd, if we can meet in there. I don't know how Friday or that week looks for everyone. The 27th.
Friday at the same time looks okay with me. I know I'm one of many.
What day is it today? It's Friday.
Oh, sorry. Today's not.
No, I said it's
Oh,
Thursday.
no, it is Friday.
I'm so glad it's Friday. We're nearing the end of the day. 12 to 2 works for me on the 27th, if it works for others, or 11 to 1 works for me as well.
I'm open right now.
Okay.
I've got 12 to 1 blocked off, but I can meet for half of that time.
Okay.
Works
Is there a
for me.
preference? Go ahead, Bronwyn.
It works for me.
Okay.
I'm okay.
Okay. So is it better from 11 to 1 or 12 to 2? I'm seeing a little variation in there. And I'm going to lose the chat after. So.
Either one works.
Okay.
They're equally bad.
I would prefer 11.
Okay. Okay. We're going to have some people for some of it and some people either way, it sounds like. So I'll send out a meeting request for that. And then in the meantime, I hope that folks are able to continue meeting as task groups. And we're sort of moving into like that step 3 that I talked about, finishing up step 2, really to identify what on a high scale, a high level, is going to happen with the different strategies and actions, and then starting to dig in deeper to decide more substantively how that is going to change and what the language is going to be around those new, maybe it's new language for a pathway, new language for a strategy, or additional actions revised combined. So I hope that's where we're heading for the next couple of weeks. And not that we need to have that complete in the next couple of weeks, but we need to be starting in on that and making some progress. So any other thoughts for our next meeting as far as topics or how we want to frame that meeting? And does 2 weeks seem like a good cadence right now? Yes. If you have any topics that you think we should tackle, please send those ideas to me. I might touch base with Danielle to see if we can maybe do some sort of mock-up application of the just transitions, because I don't think we'll get to that by 2 weeks from now, but after that meeting, I think is when we're going to have to start sort of thinking about the language more and how that how we use that guidance. So, okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a good rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Hope you get outside. Clearly, I need to do that myself. Step away from the screen. Thanks, and have a good one.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.